Well, we've been I guess we've kind of started down this road of climate change as well, a little bit. This is one of the things that you teach here at BYU, right? You teach quite a bit about climate change. What has been your experience as you teach BYU students, and maybe as people hear about you teach climate change? What's been your experience now in these 5 years here at BYU and you've been teaching this?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at kind of polling data with adults, and especially those, I'm technically a millennial, came in just under the cutoff, but older generations, there is a political divide. And that's really unfortunate, right?
It still exists today.
It still exists today. But if you look at young people, Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, independent, they're all concerned about climate change. And it's no longer this political divide. And that's what I've experienced. I have students who are very conservative, independent, liberal. All of them want to make sure that we have a livable climate moving in the future.
Why do you think that's, I mean, maybe this is beyond what you've looked at, but why is, what changed?
You know, I think that there's a really cool tool. If you search Yale Climate Americas, they've done some of the best polling. And it used to be that talk of climate change was pretty theoretical. You know, we were kind of on the front end. If you go back 30 years, we were on the front end of starting to see changes. They were even sometimes difficult to detect statistically. We're now living in a time where it's every week there is a new climate-related disaster. Whether it's the mega drought that we're living through right now in the southern US, about half of that is attributable to human-caused climate change. So this is the most extreme dry period in 1,200 years. It's not random. That is a cause of high pressure zones forming and deflecting the jet stream. This was an early prediction of climate science. It's just really hard to deny.
Okay.
And so that change has happened. Where we now are seeing a lot of controversy is in climate solutions. So, you know, there was 20 years of public
debate. Did it happen or doesn't happen?
On the scientific side, a consensus emerged pretty quickly.
Right.
And that's a key, you know this better than me, but one of the key things that we all need to know is that any individual scientific study may be right, it may be wrong, right? And in fact, the strength of science is it's going to always check each other's work.
Right.
So we're going to go back and try to disprove what you found. So an individual study isn't reliable. You're going to see one study that says coffee's good for you, then coffee's bad for you. And it's going to go back and forth. What we should be looking for is, where is the consensus in the field? Has it been verified by independent teams? And if we look at climate science, that is the case. This wasn't groupthink. There wasn't pressure that you had to do this. I have colleagues that work in the oil industry for BP and Exxon. They find the same thing, right? And they've got a. If you were thinking about bias, you'd be like, oh well, maybe they'd have a bias pushing them to not see this. They see this. They know it's happening. They know it's caused by the burning of fossil fuels. They know that it's really bad for humankind. So the denial of the problem, we've gotten over that. But now that we have viable climate solutions, there's a lot of public debate about this. Now again, on the science and engineering side, there is a consensus here. We now know that renewable energy can provide not only as much energy as we have now, much more, with a fraction of the environmental cost. So it's this big win-win. We can get electricity finally to the almost billion people who don't have reliable electricity access. This is going to be amazing, lifting people out of poverty. We can also solve climate change by transitioning over. But we've seen this huge surge of disinformation saying, actually, wind turbines are bad. And actually, solar panels don't even capture as much energy as it costs to produce them. Not at all true. But this is really, this again, we've got to put on our critical thinking caps and say, okay, yeah, maybe my political tribe previously was on a different side of this, but am I concerned enough, am I dedicated enough in my love of God and my love of neighbor to actually question what I believe? Because for me, that is at the center of what makes me want to do science. I still enjoy learning the interesting facts, learned about this new analysis of the North American cheetah, you know, this extinct predator, so cool. That's cool. But what gets me up in the morning, what makes me want to come and teach students and do research is there are so many people suffering in the world right now because of pollution. You know, this accounts for 1 in 5 deaths every year is caused by environmental pollution. It's astounding. It kills more people than all of the violence in the world, all of the communicable diseases, all of the malnutrition combined. This is just, and it's caused primarily by our energy system, you know, by the fossil fuels that we were using. And those fossil fuels played an important role in the development of our civilization. Now we have the next step. We have a superior technology that can really align our personal and economic interests with our values as a people. So it's a big risk. Are we going to allow ourselves to fall into another 10 or 20 years of political bickering over this? And I hope and pray not. It's been really encouraging to see. About a year ago, we were asked by John Curtis's office, he's a congressman, to provide an overview. You know, because I'm not, I don't have an oil company or a solar panel company. I'm an independent researcher, and a lot of the information that they see is advocacy science. You know, where it's advocacy science,
lobbying.
It's really lobbying, right? Science doesn't take sides. It doesn't advocate for a particular political view. It informs, right? It's the evidence. So we put together a report which is at renewables.byu.edu, and it was so uplifting. First of all, really cool to see an elected official really interested in information, you know, and it wasn't just us that they asked. They asked for input from a lot of people, but it was also so uplifting to see the positive changes going on now. So last year, globally, over 90% of all new energy production was wind and solar. This is around the world, and China, you know, so you're going to hear this argument of, oh, but we can't put our economy at a disadvantage because China installed 3 times more wind and solar capacity than the US did. They've become the world leaders in this technology to provide for their population and increasing consumption of energy. And as a side effect, it is solving climate change, it's reducing air pollution. After being honestly very pessimistic and discouraged for the 10 years that I was studying the impacts of climate change on ecosystems and society, I'm very hopeful now. And we can all kind of put our shoulder to the wheel. You know, I believe that God has played a role in the emergence of these technologies. If you look at, we did this analysis in a recent paper. We took the projections of the cost of solar and wind and battery technologies just from 5 years ago. And we compared that with what we have today. And we are 30 years ahead. I mean, just really amazing in the capacity of these technologies. And they're becoming more and more circular. So we now make batteries without cobalt or nickel in them. It's lithium and iron. We have new battery technologies that use sodium instead of lithium. All of these amazing innovations are in place. Are we going to turn away from them and say, you know, my political party told me that that's not the way that we're going to do? Or on the other hand, just blindly support something because that's what your party says you should. No, we need to be really thoughtful, not from an academic perspective, but as a disciple of Jesus Christ. You know, if we take those 2 commandments seriously, then we've got to really be seeking truth. And then I love the title of your program, accept it with joy and implement it with joy. Being absolutely clear.
Maybe I'll have to add that. Accept truth with joy and implement it.
I totally got off track. I was going to say, not because of our report, but independent of our report, John Curtis started this conservative climate caucus that they thought was going to get, you know, a couple dozen people sign up for it. Hundreds of congressmen and congresswomen signed up for this, and it became the second largest. It is today the second largest caucus in the U.S. Congress.
Oh, cool!
And so this is no longer a liberal, conservative, Democrat.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah,
because it seems like there's still this portion of the population that leans hard.
Yeah.
on that. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's unfortunate because I think these last few years also have caused a greater lack of trust in experts.
Yeah.
And scientists in particular, medical experts in particular, because of COVID and stuff, and so it's still it's almost like people are more in their echo chamber of news, whatever, if you call it news or whatever it is, and it's hard to break through on some of that. But what I hear from you is that you're encouraged first by the younger generation. You're encouraged by some of these people who are stepping across and saying, I want to listen to the science, I want to listen to the truth, and maybe those are the leaders that are going to move us forward, right?
Yeah, and we need everyone to be a missionary. Remember when President Hinckley, his catchphrase, every member a missionary. We can't just let a few people do this. We each need to be saying, who do I know? Who in my own family, in fact? Most of us have one or more people who have become really isolated and radicalized and fearful, suspicious. Who can I reach out to with a hand of love and respect, right? Because it's not going to be, here, let me, I've got more papers than you that prove that I'm right. No, it's always charity and concern for the other person that could open their hearts and minds to that new information. So we all have a role to play, and I hope that nobody feels that it's futile. You know, a story of a friend who was in the hospital with severe COVID, low oxygen, could die in the next few hours. And he believed that because of these YouTube videos he'd been watching, that this antiviral remdesivir was the thing that was causing the COVID deaths. And the doctor said, we need to give you this medication. And he said, I remembered what a friend told me that said, hey, the doctors are not all out to get you. They're not perfect, they're just people, but they're trying to help, trying to do their job. And that was the piece of information that allowed him to accept that medicine and likely saved his life. And so even if the person doesn't listen to you when you reach out and try to have that conversation, take the risk. And if you do it with love, I really believe that the Spirit will be there. And even if it goes poorly initially, the remembrance of that conversation could make a difference in the future for that person.
Yeah. You know, as a parallel with what I deal a lot with was evolution, right?
Yeah.
I sometimes say this, I don't know, maybe it's not a good thing to say, but I wanted you to comment on it. I always am like, look, if God really knew that evolution was false and was an evil teaching that tries to steal the souls of mankind, he wouldn't let it be taught at BYU. Like that, he just wouldn't. Like, he would talk to his prophets and apostles and say, stop teaching that terrible doctrine, right? Or that terrible idea. How many classes, how many people at BYU teach climate change? And have you ever gotten pushback from administration saying, you can't teach this? Or do you hear, yes, we want to teach this? What?
Yeah,
can you riff on that for a little bit?
Absolutely. First of all, I understand where you're coming from. About like, hey, it wouldn't be taught at BYU, but I think that's not the best way to assess.
It's not, but I mean, because for a lot of the people who are denying it, they're very literalist.
Totally.
They're literalists, right? Mm-hmm. They're reading some statement from a general authority from 35 or 50 years ago, who was uninformed about the biology, and made this statement because they adopted it from some anti-evolution, non-LDS resource.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And I think a lot of times the same thing has happened with climate change. Most of the anti-climate change people in the church have adopted that position, not from an LDS position, but through revelation, but they somehow think that has to be part of their worldview.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm like, well, if God really was, and God's got to be concerned about this earth. He loves this earth. It was good, he said, when he made it, right?
Yeah.
And so wouldn't he, if it were really the evil, tyrannical doctrine of our age, right? Wouldn't he step in and change it? And he hasn't, because you're here, and so are dozens of other people who teach it and teach.
Yeah, they're thankfully climate change is taught not only here in kind of the natural sciences, but across the whole university, right? Because you can't understand any of these political conflicts, the wars that we're experiencing, the threat to the agricultural system without considering climate change. And I think it's actually very telling to point out the US military was one of the leaders in both climate change research into what was going on and also response and resiliency. And so they have some of the best resources. They've taken this seriously for 50 years, right? Because the first briefing, the first US president who was briefed about the dangers of climate change was Lyndon B. Johnson. You know, before I was even born, right? Like we've known about this. The science has been clear for a really long time. When our course was created about 4 years ago, and we were approached by General Education and said, hey, could we use this course as an example, actually, of taking a contemporary issue of great concern that every member of the church should be engaged with and caring about, and use that as a new model for student involvement and learning. So that's been really helpful to me. Also, I was just a baby professor who didn't know how to teach very well. You know, I'd learned how to do science. I wasn't a great teacher. And yeah, apologies to your daughter, who was an excellent student in one of my classes and was very patient with me, just figuring out how to teach, you know. So thankfully, it's being integrated. And you've never had pushback from any administrator? No, there's... What about pushback from parents or students themselves? I've had some students that definitely come into the class and have kind of the view that you described, feeling like this climate change issue is mainly political. It's being pushed by certain ideology, wants to control people in a certain way. And I really appreciate when those students are brave enough to bring up their beliefs about that, you know, not forcing anyone else to believe, but expressing, hey, this is what I've heard, and this is where I am right now. That I just really deeply appreciate that. It's been the minority view because, as I said, the polling data shows, you know, 90% plus of young people are concerned about this issue. They want to ensure that we have, taking a relatively unimportant issue, that we can ski here, right? 10, 20 years from now. Yesterday was unbelievable, by the way. Incredible. It was incredible. Best day I've ever had. So amazing. Yeah. I was out as well. And yeah, so, but there absolutely are individuals that come. And it's one of the things I'm grateful for here at BYU, where we're not pushing some political ideology. We're coming together as people that are trying to follow Christ. Right. And that doesn't align with any political party. You know, we sometimes can really start to feel more association with our political tribe than with our partnership with Christ. Yeah, I mean I've said this to my channel a lot. You know, my main principle is that we should accept truth no matter where it comes from. That's right. And we should accept it with joy. And so if it's been demonstrated, we need to accept it. It's okay. And sometimes that requires being a little bit humble because it may not align with our worldview. Other times it does align with your worldview. You can pat yourself on the back and say, I got that one right, you know. And so but when it does, you know, one of the principles is you need to be most skeptical when you really agree with the information that's being presented. Because we have a shifting standard of truth, and it's really easy to be sloppy. Right. If that study or if that observation. Right, yeah, you can't just cherry pick the one or two studies that does agree with your worldview. But if the scientific consensus, the objective truth reality that emerges, right, that emergent truth, if that agrees with kind of what you were thinking, then I think it's okay to kind of congratulate yourself, like, okay, absolutely, I was online with that one, you know. And then we need to be humble in those cases when we're wrong, and go, okay, but that's okay because my principle is finding truth, and totally that trumps everything else. Absolutely, right. Yep.